What they found using Randonautica will shock you. 4 true stories. Welcome to DTC, the place of the brave, where eerie tales from the darkest corners of the world come to life. Tonight, we delve into the unsettling mysteries of the farm, where the idyllic scenery hides sinister secrets. These aren't the peaceful pastures you imagine, but instead they are home to disturbing stories of things that should never be, lurking just beneath the surface. From haunted fields to vengeful spirits, prepare to be transported to a world where the farm is anything but a peaceful retreat. So, lock your doors, dim the lights, and let's begin. What they found using Randonautica will shock you. 4 true stories. Story 1. The Footprints, a creepy encounter on the ranch. Living on a ranch had always been a simple life, one I had learned to love. The early mornings were peaceful, the distant call of the birds and the rustling of the animals signaling the start of a new day. There's something grounding about the wide, open skies and the vast, empty land stretching for miles in every direction. This was my slice of peace, where nothing unexpected ever happened. Or so I thought. It started one spring morning. I was stepping out of the house with a steaming mug of coffee, making my way toward the livestock pen to check on the goats. The air was crisp, but the rain from the night before had softened the earth, turning it into a muddy patchwork of wet dirt. As I walked across the yard, something caught my eye. There, in the damp soil, were strange impressions left by heavy boots, massive, worn, and clearly human. I froze, my heart racing slightly. But there was something else, something more disturbing. Alongside the boot prints were other marks. Hoof prints, yes, but there were human footprints mixed in. Big ones. The kind that belonged to a man who had worn thick, heavy boots. At first I thought maybe one of the farm hands had come by unexpectedly, but that didn't make sense. None of them would have had any reason to be out here after dark. Besides, the prints didn't lead to the barn or the fields. They didn't make any sense. Instead, they seemed to follow a strange, looping pattern around the livestock pen, past the porch, and then into the woods at the edge of the property. I tried not to overthink it. Ranch life isn't glamorous, and sometimes weird things happen. Maybe it was just a hunter who'd wandered onto my land, or perhaps a prank from the neighbor's kid, though I had a hard time believing he'd come this far out on his own. But still, the feeling gnawed at the back of my mind as I went about my day. The next morning, though, something changed. The prints were back, fresh, unmistakable, and just as large as before. The same eerie pattern, circling the pen, pausing at the porch, then vanishing into the woods. This time I couldn't ignore it. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were watching. And something told me they were getting closer. I decided to follow the trail, hoping to find some answers. It was eerily quiet as I walked, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The trail led me deeper into the woods, farther than I had ever ventured. Every step felt heavier, like I was treading on something dark and old. About 100 yards in, the footprints suddenly veered toward the road and disappeared into the distance. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the strange discovery over and over in my mind. Whoever was coming onto my property wasn't just wandering. They were here for a reason. They were watching me, maybe even waiting for something. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stalked, and after a week of this, the terror finally caught up with me. I wasn't about to let someone creep around my land, not without knowing who they were or what they wanted. So I grabbed my shotgun, packed a thermos of coffee, and threw a thick blanket into the back of the truck. If someone was going to mess with me, they'd find out just how far I was willing to go to protect my home. I holed up in the barn, keeping a clear view of both the livestock pen and the house. It was just after midnight when I heard it, footsteps crunching on gravel. My heart raced, and I squinted through the slats of the barn, peering into the yard. There, moving from the tree line, a figure emerged. It was slow, deliberate, and it was heading straight toward the pen. The figure was tall, and as it moved closer, I could make out a dark silhouette. A man wearing something black, something that seemed to blend with the darkness. He paused just where the footprints had stopped, at the edge of the pen. I held my breath. My fingers tightened around the shotgun. Then something else caught my eye. There was another figure, but this one stayed hidden in the shadow of the trees. It wasn't moving, just standing still, like it was watching the first man. I couldn't see clearly enough to make out any details, but I could feel the cold weight of fear creeping up my spine. These people weren't just wandering, they were here for a reason. They were waiting for me. I couldn't just sit there, I had to act. I fired 2 warning shots into the air, hoping to scare them off. The sound of the shots echoed across the ranch, breaking the stillness of the night. For a moment, the man near the pen froze. Then, with surprising speed, he spun toward the woods. I thought for a second he might run, but instead, there was a loud crack, and a bullet slammed into the barn door just a few feet from where I crouched. My blood turned cold. I ducked instinctively, my heart pounding in my chest. Another shot rang out, this time shattering the wooden wall beside me. I realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was something else. These people weren't afraid of getting caught. They were armed and ready to fight. And they weren't just passing through. They were hunting something. Someone. As the night dragged on, I kept my eyes trained on the figures, now hidden in the shadows. My hands were shaking, but I knew I couldn't let fear control me. Not now. Not when I was so close to discovering the truth. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, circling the ranch, never stopping, always returning to the woods. I couldn't escape the feeling that whatever these people were, they were not from this world. They were something darker, something that didn't belong in the quiet fields and soft winds of my ranch. Something that had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. As the hours passed, the silence became deafening, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch or the rustle of leaves in the wind. I couldn't help but think that whatever was happening, it was just the beginning. They were out there, watching, waiting, and I knew it wouldn't end until they got what they wanted. The next day, when I ventured out again, I found the footprints had returned, even deeper in the mud, even more pronounced. And for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar comfort of the ranch beneath my feet. No, it felt like the ground itself was betraying me, like something evil had taken root, something far worse than just a man in heavy boots. And so I stayed, watching the woods, my heart filled with dread. The figures were still out there, circling, waiting. I was no longer alone on my land. Someone had come to claim it, and they weren't going anywhere until they got what they wanted. But what did they want? That was the one question I couldn't answer, and I feared I would never find out, alive. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2. The Makeshift Campsite, a Creepypasta Horror Story. As a crop farmer, my life is built on routines. Every morning, I'm out in the fields, checking the irrigation, inspecting the soil, and making sure everything is on track for harvest. It's hard work, but I love it. The farm has been in my family for generations, and there's a certain pride in maintaining it. The scent of the earth, the warmth of the sun on my skin, and the quiet of the early mornings have always been comforting to me, but that all changed in 2016. It was a Tuesday morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the rows of corn that stretched as far as the eye could see. I brought my dog, Max, along that day, as I often did. He was a loyal farm dog, always sticking close by, his sharp instincts never failing to alert me to anything unusual. Max was the type of dog who could sense danger before it arrived, and on that day he did. We were walking the perimeter of the property, just the two of us, when Max froze in place. His nose twitched, his ears perked up, and then he started barking, that deep, insistent bark that only came out when something wasn't right. I stopped, frowning. "Calm down, boy," I said, patting his head. But then I saw it, too. There, near the edge of the field, was a makeshift campsite. At first glance, it didn't look like much, just a patch of flattened grass with a circle of stones that had clearly been used as a fire pit. But as I drew closer, the hairs on the back of my neck began to stand on end. Something about it didn't sit right with me. The ashes in the fire pit were still warm, a faint trace of smoke still lingering in the air, even though there was no fire. That was strange. This was a secluded part of the farm. No one should have been here. Then I noticed other things, a crumpled blanket, several empty cans of food, and footprints in the dirt. They weren't mine, and they certainly weren't Max's. I crouched down to examine them. The footprints were large, heavy prints, not quite human, but not animal either. The edges of the prints were jagged, like they had been made by someone or something trying to walk but struggling to maintain balance. Someone or something had been living here. Max wouldn't stop barking. He paced back and forth, sniffing the ground, his body tense. I called him over, trying to calm him, but my heart was racing. I inspected the blanket, which was old and dirty, but oddly, it was carefully folded, almost like someone had left it with the intention of returning. There was a strange smell in the air, damp earth mixed with something faintly metallic, like blood. But there were no obvious signs of violence. What really unsettled me, though, were the footprints. They led from the campsite across the field, and then they stopped just short of the back porch of my house. I stood frozen. Why would anyone leave the safety of the field and come this close to the house? Why not stay out there, where no one would find them? The thought chilled me to the core. Max was still barking, his growls growing louder as he circled around the house. I decided to follow the footprints. They were clear, leading across the tall, waving grass toward the barn. The ground was soft, and every footstep felt as though it was a secret waiting to be uncovered. I reached the back porch, and that's when I saw it. Scratches. Deep claw-like scratches marred the doorframe, as though something or someone had tried to pry the door open. I ran my fingers along the marks, feeling the roughness of the gouges. They weren't made by a normal hand. They were too deep, too unnatural. My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. A drifter, maybe? Someone passing through and looking for shelter. But why so close to the house? Why not just stay out in the field where they could be left alone? I didn't know what to think. That night I locked every door and window and kept Max inside with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. I barely slept. Around midnight, I was jerked awake by a low growl from Max. I grabbed the flashlight from my bedside table and crept to the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The yard outside was dark, the air still and silent. But Max wouldn't stop growling. His body was rigid, his eyes fixed on something near the back porch. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but something was there. The next morning, I went back out to the campsite. It looked the same as before, except for one thing. The blanket was gone. Whoever had been there had returned during the night. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Max had been barking because they had come back. He had sensed them too. The following days were even worse. Every morning I found fresh footprints near the house. They always led to the same places: the back porch, the barn, and sometimes even by the kitchen window. I felt like I was being stalked, like I was no longer alone on my own farm. The feeling of eyes on me grew stronger, and I began to dread the silence of the nights. I kept the lights on, locked every door, and kept Max close. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, as I was walking along the edge of the property, I noticed something strange. The air around me seemed to thicken, the atmosphere growing heavy, as though the very land was holding its breath. I stopped in my tracks. My blood ran cold as I heard a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the wind stirring the tall grass. Or so I thought. Suddenly I saw a shadow dart across the field at the edge of the trees. A figure, thin, long-limbed, and pale, almost ghostly in its movements. My heart skipped a beat. I was no longer alone. Someone or something was out there watching me. The footsteps, the scratches on the door, the blanket that had disappeared, all of it was leading to this moment. I had never felt so powerless. Max's growl broke the silence, his eyes fixed on the trees where the figure had disappeared. But I didn't dare go after it. I couldn't shake the thought that whatever it wasn't human. That night I stayed inside, bolted the windows, and barricaded the doors. But I knew it was only a matter of time before whatever was out there came for me. And this time I wouldn't be able to hide. Max's barking still echoes in my mind, a reminder of the horrors lurking just beyond the light. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the ones you can see, but the ones you can't. Whatever has been living on my farm, whoever it is, it hasn't left. And it's only getting closer. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3, The Mysterious Stranger, a Farm Horror Story. When my friend Paul called me out of the blue to ask for a favor, I didn't hesitate. I'd been working freelance as a horse trainer for the past few years, so my schedule was pretty flexible. Paul owned a modest farm a couple of hours away, and he needed someone to watch the place while he attended a cattle fair for the week. At first, it sounded simple enough, just a quiet week on the farm. What could go wrong? Paul offered a bit of cash, free lodging, and all the peace and quiet I could ask for. To me, it sounded like a perfect getaway. The farmhouse was a charming, rustic 2-story with a wraparound porch that overlooked the sprawling pastures. I'd always enjoyed visiting Paul's place. There was something peaceful about it. The horses were gentle, the air was crisp, and the nights were serene. It was the perfect escape from the chaos of city life. When I arrived, Paul gave me a detailed list of chores: feed the horses, muck out the stalls, and check the fences. Simple enough. And, of course, he reminded me to keep an eye on the house. He paused for a moment before walking to a cabinet and pulling out a small handgun, offering it to me. "You can keep this, just in case," Paul said, handing it to me with a serious look. I hesitated. "Thanks, but I think I'll be fine," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'll just make sure everything's locked up." Paul didn't look convinced. "All right, but if anything feels off, don't hesitate to call the cops. Better safe than sorry." I dismissed his warning as unnecessary. It was just a farm after all, and I figured I was safe. I had spent time here before, and the only thing I ever had to worry about was the occasional coyote or stray animal crossing the property line. I didn't give it another thought, especially with the quiet surroundings and the comfort of the house. The first few days were uneventful. I got into a routine, feeding the horses, cleaning the stalls, and checking the fences. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of stillness that can make you feel like something is lurking just beyond your sight, waiting. By night, the house creaked with the wind, and the shadows seemed to dance in the corners of the rooms. But still, there was nothing to worry about. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Then, on the fourth night, things started to get strange. It was around 2 a.m. when I was woken by a soft, muffled sound. At first I thought it was just the wind howling outside, but then I heard it again, a faint scratching sound coming from the back door. My heart started to race. I lay still in bed, listening intently. The scratching stopped, but now I could hear faint footsteps, like someone or something was walking around the perimeter of the house. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none made sense. I grabbed the handgun Paul had left me, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with it. I waited, straining to hear any movement. The footsteps came closer to the door. My breath caught in my throat as I heard the unmistakable sound of someone or something breathing just outside. The door handle rattled. Then silence. I slowly got out of bed, gripping the gun tightly, and crept toward the door. My mind kept racing with what I should do. Should I open it? Should I call the cops? But the house was in the middle of nowhere. Who would even hear me? I pressed my ear against the door, but there was nothing. Just the stillness of the night. After what felt like an eternity, I opened the door slowly. There was nothing there. I stepped outside, trying to reassure myself that I had imagined the whole thing. The moonlight bathed the farm in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the pasture. But as I scanned the yard, I noticed something unusual. At the far end of the field, near the barn, I saw a figure. It was standing still, watching me. A tall man, his features hidden by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. But what struck me the most was the unnatural stillness of his presence. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at me. I called out, my voice shaky. "Hey, who's there?" No response. I tried to walk toward him, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The closer I got, the more unnerving the situation became. The figure didn't budge. It felt as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Finally, when I was about 50 feet from him, the man began to move. Slowly at first, but with a deliberate pace. He stepped toward me, his eyes never leaving mine, his face hidden in the shadows. I froze, my hand still clutching the gun. He kept walking until we were standing just a few feet apart. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hear the sound of my breath, ragged and loud in the silence. "Can I help you?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his hand slowly and pointed toward the barn. I followed his gaze and saw, to my horror, that the barn door was slightly ajar. The same barn that I had checked earlier that day, which had been locked tight. I wanted to say something, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could react, the man turned and started walking toward the barn without a word. Something deep inside me screamed at me to stay, to call for help, but my legs moved before my brain could catch up. I followed him, a sense of dread hanging over me like a dark cloud. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, and I could see the faint silhouette of the man in the dark interior. As I stepped inside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The barn was full of strange symbols etched into the wooden beams, symbols that looked like they had been carved hastily. And there in the center of the barn was a large, twisted figure, a statue of sorts made of what looked like bone and animal parts. The figure's face was a grotesque mask, its eyes hollow and lifeless. Suddenly I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The man, or whatever he was gone. The barn was silent again, but the sense of unease lingered and my mind couldn't shake the feeling that I had just uncovered something dark and ancient, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. I ran back to the house, locking the door behind me. My thoughts raced as I tried to process what had just happened. Was it a prank? Or had I stumbled into something far more sinister? That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, listening for any sounds, but nothing came. The next morning, I found the strange figure's footprints leading to the barn, but they stopped abruptly at the door. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Paul returned the following day, and I never spoke to him about the events that happened. I didn't want to seem crazy, but every time I think about that night, I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is still watching me. I left the farm that week and never returned, but every now and then I hear whispers in the wind when I'm alone in the quiet of the night. Whispers that remind me of the man who never said a word, but left me with an unmistakable sense of dread that still haunts me to this day. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 4. The Mysterious Footprints, a Haunting Farm Horror Story. When I agreed to look after Paul's farm while he was away for the week, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Paul's farm is isolated, surrounded by miles of empty fields and dense forests far from the nearest town. It's a peaceful place, or at least it used to be every time I visited, but the feeling of solitude that had once seemed calming now made the place feel suffocating, eerie even. There was something about it this time that felt off. The first day, everything seemed normal enough. I woke up early, sipping on my warm cup of coffee as I started my usual routine, feeding the horses, mucking out the stables, and checking the fences. The weather was dreary, with a soft mist rolling across the fields, and I wasn't paying much attention to anything other than getting the job done. But then, as I walked around a corner of the barn, something caught my eye. A large footprint pressed deep into the soft earth. It was bigger than any shoe or boot I'd ever seen, almost as if it belonged to someone wearing massive, heavy boots. My first thought was that maybe someone had been walking around the property the night before, but there was no sign of a trail leading to or from the farm. What unsettled me more, however, was the direction of the print. It didn't lead to the gate or any path, but instead seemed to loop around the farm and disappear into the woods behind the house. I shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just some animal or a stray who had wandered through during the night. But as I moved further, inspecting the rest of the farm, I noticed something else, more footprints, fresh ones, all leading into the same patch of woods. The next day, the footprints were back, only this time they were more distinct and clearer than before. They didn't stop at the woods, they continued, leading right up to the back door of the house. I froze, a shiver running down my spine. I had never been one to believe in the supernatural, but this was too strange to ignore. Who could be walking around in the middle of nowhere like this? And why did the footprints always appear and disappear without a trace? That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I lay in bed, gripping the gun Paul had left for me, trying to calm my nerves, but something was wrong. There was an undeniable presence, something watching me, something out there. As the wind howled through the cracks in the old farmhouse, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the back door. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed perfectly still, listening intently, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, in the shadowed darkness, I saw it, a figure standing just outside the door. At first I thought it was some lost traveler or a prank, but then I saw it more clearly. It wasn't human. The figure had the body of a man, but its head was that of a white wolf, glowing unnaturally in the moonlight. Its eyes were bright and cold, staring straight at me through the crack in the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen, my gun gripped in my shaking hands, watching as the creature stood there motionless, as if waiting for something. My mind raced. What was this? Who or what was this? My pulse thundered in my ears as the figure took a step back and disappeared into the shadows, its footsteps fading away as silently as it had come. The next morning I checked the back door, my heart in my throat. No signs of the creature, no footprints, no disturbances. Had I imagined it all? But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I knew what I had seen, and whatever it wasn't something I could explain away. It wasn't human. It wasn't even entirely animal. It was something otherworldly. Days passed, and the footprints continued to appear, always at night, always leading into the woods. The air grew thicker, heavier, and the feeling of being watched never left me. Each day, the creature's presence seemed closer. I could feel it in the way the wind shifted, in the way the shadows moved in the corners of my eyes. There was something malevolent in the air, something that made my skin crawl. One night, I decided I couldn't just sit by and let whatever this was go unchecked. I would find out what was happening on this farm, even if it meant facing whatever was hiding in those woods. I grabbed a flashlight, my gun, and my nerves, and I ventured out. The wind howled around me as I made my way through the barn, down the familiar paths I had walked 100 times before, but this time I was looking for something more. I reached the edge of the woods, my feet crunching on the dry leaves. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out like claws, as if trying to pull me in. I hesitated, but only for a moment before pushing forward. The further I walked, the colder it became, the silence deeper. Then I saw it. A shadow moved among the trees, too fast, too fluid. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in this world. The creature, with its glowing white wolf's head and tall, shadowy figure, darted between the trees, just out of reach of the beam of my flashlight. I tried to follow, but the thing was too fast, too elusive. It was playing with me, like a predator toying with its prey. I called out, my voice breaking through the stillness. "Who are you? What do you want?" The words felt foolish as soon as they left my lips, but the thing didn't answer. Instead, it lunged at me from the shadows, a blur of white fur and eyes that burned with an unnatural fire. I fired my gun in panic, but it was no use. The creature disappeared before the bullet even left the chamber, leaving me standing alone in the darkness, heart racing with nothing but the echoes of my own fear for company. I made it back to the farmhouse that night, my mind in a haze of terror. The creature had been real. It was real, and it was still out there. But what did it want with me? Why had it chosen to haunt this farm? And why had the footprints always appeared when I was alone? In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. Something ancient, something that had been waiting in those woods long before I had ever stepped foot on this land. It wasn't just a strange animal or a lonely traveler. It was something far older and far more dangerous, and I was trapped, alone in the heart of its domain, with no way to escape. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC, the place of the brave, now, and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the place of the brave are always waiting, and they never rest. Good luck sleeping tonight.